Hello, this is Abdullah from University of Gondar Faculty of Informatics, and this is Fundamentals of Programming video tutorial. On our previous tutorial, we have seen about the loop statement, which is the first loop statement, what we call it the for loop. So basically, we use for loop if we have the same code to be executed a number of times in our program, and instead of writing the same code again and again, we can tell the compiler to repeat that code many times with the help of the loop statement. So the first loop statement that we discussed in our previous tutorial is the for loop. So usually in C++ there are three types of loop statements: the for loop, while loop, do while loop. So the for loop, while loop, and do while loop, and then they are designed for different programming situations. So in this tutorial we will see what exactly is the difference, and then when these three loop statements are recommended to use. So let's have a look at what exactly is each loop statement mean. Okay, so in here, for example, the first one is the for loop. So basically we use for loop if we know in advance how many times the loop should be executed. So in that case, for loop is recommended. For example, if we are asked to display number 1 up to 5, we know that the loop will go 5 times. In that case, for loop is recommended. If you are asked to display, for example, the word welcome 10 times, we know that the loop will go 10 times. In that case, for loop is recommended. So if we know the scenario when that for loop is recommended, the other important thing that we are going to see is the syntax, the programming rules, rule that you should follow whenever you deal with the for loop. So this is the syntax. Always you have to start with the initialization and then the control, update, and the statement. So the initialization will initialize the control variable, and then the control will control to go beyond the control. For example, if we are asked to display number 1 up to 5, the initialization is 1, the control is 5. So the control will tell the compiler not to go beyond 5, and then in each loop the value of I will be incremented by 1 to arrive at 5 starting from number 1. So in each loop, if the for loop is the control is true, the statement will have a chance to be executed. So basically, to simply understand the loop, you need to know the order of execution of the statement. So basically, this statement is what we call it step 0, the initialization. The control is step 1, and then the statement is step 2, and then the update is step 3. So this way the statement will be executed. So one very much important point that you should understand is that the initialization will be executed only once, whereas the control, the statement, and the update will be executed many times depending on the result of the control. If the control results true, the statement will be executed. So this step 1 to 3 will be executed many times. The loop exists right here. So the control, if the control results true, this step 1 to 3 will be executed many times. So let's have a look at then the code example. For example, if you are asked to display number 1 up to 5, in that case, this is the right example. Now, number 0 up to 5, for example, if you are asked to display the number 0 up to 5, we have to do these things. So this will display number 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4 and 5. So in this case, this is our step 1, our step 0. Step 0, step 1, step 2, step 3. Okay, from this step, one thing that you should understand is that always step 0 will be executed once, whereas step 1 to 3 will be executed many times depending on the control. If the control results true, again it will go to step 2, display the execution, and then it will go to step 3, update the control variable. So this way. So this is what we have discussed in our previous tutorial on the for loop. So now let's have a look at what exactly is a while loop, when while loop is recommended then. So we use while loop if we know, as well as if we do not know in advance how many times the loop should be executed. This is very much important. if we know in advance how many times the loop should be executed, we can do it with while loop, and then we can do it with for loop. But for loop is recommended. So specifically while loop is recommended if we do not know in advance. This is very much important. If we do not know in advance how many times the loop should be executed, in that case the while loop is recommended. Okay, so the number of loop will depending on at the time of execution of the program. The number of loop will depending on the operation that we perform inside the program. So we don't know before we write the program, before we run the program, we don't know in advance how many times the loop should be executed. In that scenario, while loop is the recommended one. We can't do, if we don't know in advance how many times the loop should be executed, we can't do it with a for loop. So let's have a look at the programming syntax then. So this is how you deal with the while loop. So this is the programming syntax of the while loop. So it contains all of the components of the for loop. What's the difference is the syntax, the location that we write all the elements, as we discussed before. So this is our initialization, which is step 0. I think it's not visible. This is our initialization, which is step 0, like this one. The control is inside the while loop, step 1, and then the statement is step 2, and then the update is step 3. Like the for loop, initialization step 0 will be executed only once, whereas step 1, step 2, and step 3 will be executed many times depending on the value, the result of the control. If the control is true, it will go to step 2, execute the statement, and then update the increment. So this is how we just write the while statements. So let's have a look at the code example there. So this is the exact copy of the previous program that we do in the for loop. So the initialization will start. The initialization will locate at the top of the program, and then the control I less than 5 will be put inside the while loop, and then it's a must to have a bracket, and then display the statement, and then increment the value of I by 1. Okay, this is the programming syntax of the while loop. So what you need to write here is, if you know in advance how many times your loop should be executed, you can do it with for loop as well as with while loop, but for loop is recommended. But if you do not know in advance how many times the loop should be executed, you can use while loop as well as do while loop. Okay. Let's see then what exactly is the do while loop mean. So almost the definition and the idea is equivalent to the do while loop. So usually many students confuse the difference between while loop and do while loop. We can use do while loop if we know, as well as if we do not know in advance how many times the loop should be executed, but in this scenario is recommended if we do not know in advance how many times the loop should be executed. So let's have a look at the programming rule, the syntax on how to deal with the do while loop then. So in here, this is a rule. Like the while loop, we have to put the initialization first, which is step 0. And then in here, before the control, we have to execute the statement, which is step 1, sorry. The statement is step 1. And then the update is step 2. And then the control will be executed at last, step 3. You need to understand the difference between these two things. Step 1 of while loop is step 3 of do while loop. Later on the tutorial we will see what exactly is the difference between these two things. So let's see a code example then. Okay, this is a code example, simple. Okay, so initialization, do what to do, display the value of I, and then increment the value of I, and then go to the control. Don't forget to add a semicolon at the end of the control. So they are equivalent but with slight programming difference. while loop and do while loop are recommended if we do not know in advance how many times the loop should be executed, but there is a slight programming difference between while loop and do while loop that we will see later on the tutorial. So let's go back to the source code and we will see how we can write the do while and while loop programs with code example. Okay, then let's open the code block. So this was our previous program that will display number 1 up to 5 with the help of the for loop, as you see here. The for is the initialization, which is the step 0. Okay, this is the initialization, the step 0. This is the control, step 1. This is the statement, step 2, and then this is the update, step 3. So step 0 will be executed only once, whereas step 1 to 3 will be executed many times depending on the result of the control. Okay, so if that is the case, let's try to rewrite this program with the help of the while loop. Okay, the syntax of while loop is we have to start the initialization and then followed by the while loop. Inside the while loop we'll put the control, and then while loop will have a bracket, and then inside the bracket we are going to type the statement to display the value of I. Okay, and then finally the update. So in here, step 0 of the for loop, step 0 of the while loop, step 1 of the for loop, step 1 of the while loop, step 2 of the for loop, step 2 of the while loop, step 3 of the for loop, and then step 3 of the while loop. Almost they contain all the elements of the loop statement, but what matters, what is the difference, is the rule of the syntax. Okay then, so let's remove the for loop, and then let's do it with while loop. Run, we'll get exactly the same output. See, we'll get exactly the same output. So if we do not know, if we know in advance how many times the loop should be executed, we can do it with while loop as well as with for loop, but while for loop is recommended if we know the number of loop ahead. So let's see then, for example, assume that we have a number like this, and then we need to display the this number by dividing into 3. For example, this is it, while I greater than or equals to 1, I need to display the value of I, and then in each loop I need to divide the value of I by 3. In this case, we don't know how many times the loop should be executed. It's depending on this condition. So for example, let's compile. Okay, let's compile and run. You see the value of I was 245, and then when it goes to this one, it will divide the value of I by 1, and then it becomes 81 by 3, and then next it will divide by 3 divided by 3, 1, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we don't know how many times this loop should be executed. It's depending on this scenario. In that case, it's not possible to rewrite this program with the help of the while loop. Okay, with the help of the while loop. For example, if we increment this one, for example, we can do this one. So still we don't know how many times the loop should be executed. So it will, starting from 584, it will continue up to 1, and then in each loop the value of I will be divided into 3. So we don't know how many times the loop should be executed. It's depending on the execution of the program. So in that kind of scenario, while loop is recommended. So for example, the other thing, let's try to input a number. If that number is positive, I need to continue. If not, I need to stop the program. So for example, let me declare a variable like this, and then let's declare a variable, integer variable. If the user enter a number, let's continue. If not, let's stop the program. So while cin I display out without increment. This means if the user input a number, I need to display that number. When this program will stop? If the user input a value which is different from a number. So how many times this loop should be executed? We don't know, depending on the user input. If the user input in an integer number, the program will continue. If the user input, for example, a character, the program will stop. So this is the other scenario that we usually use while loop, because we don't know how many times the loop should be executed, depending on the user input. So let's see. Compile, have a look. Let me insert integer. 8 will be displayed. 9 is integer, 9 will be displayed. Minus 9 is minus, for example, minus 5 is integer, minus 5 will be displayed. If I just input a character P, in that case, cin I will become false, because P is not an integer value. In that case, the program will terminate. So this program will continue until if the user input an integer number. It will stop if the user enter a value which is different from integer number. So we don't know when the user enter a number which is a value which is different from an integer number. So in that kind of scenario, while loop is recommended. So let's rewrite the previous program, the for loop program, with the do while loop. So obviously the do while loop will start from the initialization. I equals to, for example, 0, and then do what to do, display the value of I, and then in each loop increment the value of I by 1 up to when the condition is after the bracket I less than or equals to 5, and then finally semicolon. So this is the syntax of the while loop. Compile, run, hopefully we will get the same result, number 0 up to 5, the same as the previous program. What makes a difference is the syntax. In this case, step 0, okay, you see, this is the step 0, this is step 1, step 2, step 3. Step 0 is the initialization, step 1 is the statement, step 2 is the increment, step 3 is the update. So this step will repeat if this result is true. So then, what exactly is the difference between while loop and then do while loop? If we use while loop and do while loop, if we do not know in advance how many times the loop should be executed, so what exactly is the programming difference between while loop and do while loop? So let me show you with a code example. So let me do it with, for example, for a program which display the word welcome. Okay, and I cin I. Let me show you. Int I equals to, for example, 0, while I greater than or equals I greater than 0, I need to display welcome, and then that's all. For example, I plus plus. I equals to false. Okay, let's do it this way. So let's compile. So this is a program that will check the value of I, and then if the value of I is greater than 0, it will display welcome. Have a look. It's very much important. Here, the value of I is 0. 0 greater than 0 is false. 0 greater than 0 is false, meaning we are not going to have any output in this program because the condition, the control of the while loop is false at the beginning of the program. Have a look. Int I equals to 0. Yes. While 0 greater than 0 is false, so it will never execute this statement. It will never execute this statement. So if we run this program, we will never get any output at all. So let's compile, run, have a look. An empty screen will appear. An empty screen will appear. There is no output at all because the program will become false at the beginning. But if you rewrite this program with the do while loop, as usual, the initialization will start, and then the do will continue, and then display the word welcome, and then at the end we have to check whether the value of I is greater than 0 or not. Here the very important point that you should understand is in the case of while loop, the condition will be checked first and then the statement will be executed next. So depending on the condition, the statement will be executed. See? So the execution of the statement is totally depending on the condition because as order, the while loop will be executed first, the condition will be executed first, and then the statement will be executed next. When we come to the while loop, the statement will be executed first, and then the while loop will be executed, the condition will be executed second. So, what exactly is the difference? This statement, in the case of while loop, this statement will have a guarantee to be executed 0 or more times. This is exactly the programming difference between while loop and while loop. This statement will have a guarantee to be executed either no times or either 0 times or more times because it's depending on the condition. Because in the case of while loop, the condition will be executed first and then the statement will be executed next. When we come to the do while loop, the statement will be executed first and then the condition will be executed next. Meaning, by any means, this statement will have a guarantee to be executed at least 1 or more times. That is the programming difference between while loop and do while loop. The statement in between the while loop will have a guarantee to be executed 0 or more times. The statement in between do while loop will have a guarantee to be executed at least once, whether this condition results true or not, because based on their order, the statement will have the first priority to be executed and then the condition will be executed next. Have a look. I equals to 0. Continue the do. Say out welcome. I will get 1 welcome. And then when we come to the condition, it becomes false. So I got 1 welcome on the screen. Okay, so let's see then. Let's delete the previous program. Okay, compile. As you see here, previously when we tried to run this program, the while loop, we didn't get any output because at the first execution, when the program tried to execute the while loop, it becomes false. So this welcome statement will have a guarantee to be executed 0 times. Okay, whereas if you do it with a do while loop, compile and run, and I will get 1 welcome. You see the difference? I will get 1 because the program will execute the statement before the condition. So obviously the condition is false, but since the compiler first execute the statement, I will get 1 welcome on the screen, and when it goes to the second when it goes to the while loop, it becomes false, so that it will never execute the while loop more than one times. So you will get one welcome on the screen. So let's see. Let me modify the program. So what if this is 1? Let me decrement the value of I by 1. So I was 1 greater than 0, true, display 1 will come, and then it will decrement the value of I by 1. It was 1, minus 1, 0, 0 greater than 0, false, so I'll get 1 will come on the screen in the case of this program. Have a look in the case of this program, because the condition results through 1 times, that's why we get 1 will come on the screen. If you exactly rewrite this program with the help of the while loop, if you start with 1 and then decrement the value of I by 1, we will get not only 1 will come, but 2 will come. So first I is 1, display 1 will come, and then I will be decremented by 1. Have a look. Sorry, obviously we will get 1 will come like the previous program, because it will decrement, see, because it just decrement the value of I before the condition. So obviously this program also gets 1 will come on the screen. So one thing that you should understand between the difference between the while loop and the while loop is that the statement in the while loop will have a probability to be executed no times 0 or times. This is in the case of the while loop. When we come to in the case of the do while loop, the statement in the do while loop will be executed one or more times. So in the case of do while loop, the statement will have a guarantee to be executed at least 1 times, whether this condition results true or not, results true or false. So this is the programming difference between while loop and do while loop. So let's have a look at some other important point about the for loop, and then we will end our tutorial. So on our previous tutorial, we have seen about this program that will display number 1 up to 5 on the screen. Yes, okay, so this program will display, this program will display number 1 up to 5 on the screen. 1 up to 5 on the screen. Here, when it's actually a good programming practice to add a bracket after the for loop. But if the number of statements that will be executed depending on the for loop is 1, adding a bracket is optional. You can do it, you can add a bracket, but it's optional. Bracket is mandatory if the number of statements that will execute depending on the for loop is 2 or more. For example, if I want to display the value I as well as to display will come on the screen. In this case, this bracket is a must. So try to understand the point. If the number of statements that will be executed based on the for loop is only 1, this bracket is optional. You can delete this bracket or you can add the bracket. Bracket is optional. But in this case, we do have 2 statements that will depending on the for loop. In that case, it's a must to add a bracket in between the statements of the for loop. So in this case, we'll get usually 1 will come, 2 will come, 3 will come, 4 will come, or 2, 5 will come. 1 will come, 2 will come, 3 will come, 4 will come, 5 will come, like this. So one thing that you should understand is if the number of statements that will depending on the for loop is 2 or more, bracket is a must. If the number of statements that will be depending on the for loop is 1, bracket is optional. You can add a bracket or you can ignore the bracket. So that's all that you need to know about the for loop. Maybe in the next tutorial we will see some different scenario of the for loop, the loop statements. Thank you very much. Bye.